Hi, welcome to the garage. I'm David Schoneman. Have you ever wondered about taking a pile of rusty, old, vintage motorcycle parts like this and making them into something like this? We're going to show you how. Stay with us. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the garage. Welcome back. Glad you're here. Trying a little different camera today, so we'll see how this goes. If you have any opinions about it, let me know. Always glad to hear from you. Today we are doing episode 3 of our project to restore to running condition this 1972 BMW R75/5 that hasn't run in 25 years. We've made some progress on it, and I'm going to give you an update here. We'll walk around, and I'll show you what we got going. And then we'll talk about what's coming up next. So we're working on the 1972 R75/5. Hope you've seen the previous episodes. We made a lot of progress. Last time we were here, we were talking about wiring, and I've got a lot of the wiring done. I've got the electronic ignition installed, and we'll show you all these things. All right, is our bike, and 1972 R75/5. It looks pretty much the same as it did, except that we've got the front wheel back on. We've got new tires on. We'll talk about that as we walk around. And I've also got the luggage rack on. I mentioned to you last time that I thought I had a luggage rack in storage, and I did. And it fit on here. You'll see what the rack looks like on the other side without the case on, but I wanted to put this case on just to show it to you. It works pretty well, and I think it makes the bike ready to go on a ride. It looks good. You got plenty of storage in these cases, and they're vintage cases, and it's part of the bike, and we're glad to have it here. It completes the look. So let's step a little closer, and we can see that the engine is still basically open. We have the carburetor off. The carburetor would have gone here, goes here, and it connects to the intake manifold there. Inside that box, we would have the air filter. We'll see that from the other side. The top of the motor case is still off too, and we can see we got the starter motor in here. Let's take a closer look at some of the electronics that we have. I talked about a new regulator rectifier. That's this silver unit right here. This is from Rick's Motorsports right here in New Hampshire. And it's a regulator rectifier that replaces the diode board. I'll show you where the diode board was on the front of the engine, but it replaces the diode board, and it also replaces the old voltage regulator that was here. Now, if this bike had been running and the diode board and the regulator were fine, I probably would have left it. But when we have a bike that's been sitting for so long and electronics have been sitting for a long time also, it seemed better to just replace it with something new. So this bike now has all modern electronics. We'll talk about that as we walk along. Before we leave the voltage regulator, though, I want to just tell you a little bit about what I did to make it fit. These voltage regulators are supplied with a harness that will connect to the BMW connections, and it's great to have that. But they don't specify or know where you're going to actually mount that voltage regulator. Where this one is mounted is where the old voltage regulator would have been, and if you mounted it somewhere else, you would need a long lead. Now, the leads were quite long. In the last video, I showed you how long the wires were. So in this case, we have the wires leaving the voltage regulator, making a little arc here, and coming down into the engine case. They'll connect at the front at the alternator. And so I shortened the wires. I soldered all the connections to make the harness fit. We didn't want to have loops and loops of wire all over the place. So that's the voltage regulator. It's a great product. Highly recommend it. While we're up here, let's take a look at the top. This is the Moto Gadget M unit. It's essentially a relay block, but it does a lot more. It's got fuse protection in it. It's got a turn signal relay in it. It's got a lot of smart controls, some of which are programmable. It's a small unit, about the size of a pack of playing cards, and it sits right here on top of the frame. It's bolted on right underneath the tank, and it's got all the connections for the electrical system. All new wires in this bike too, by the way. I took the old wires out because there was an issue, as I explained in previous videos, where there was a short in the headlight bucket and the insulation began to melt. So on the Moto Gadget M unit, we've got a bank of wire connectors here and a bank on the left side and a bank on the right side. The bank on the left side, you can see the wires are smaller than the bank on the right side. The bank on the left side is for inputs. So any switches, like the handlebar switches, headlight switches, brake light switches, everything wires into this side. And the wires are small because we're not actually carrying much power. It's millivolts that are going through here. So we don't need big wires. And in here, once the unit senses that you've activated a switch, it will, by an internal relay, activate the item you've selected, and power will come out the right side. Now here's where we have traditional 12-volt power coming out. So we have much larger wires, not huge, but certainly more like what would have been on a bike originally. Typically 18 or even 16 gauge wires coming out that go to all of the appliances. So there's wires here that run to left and right turn signals, run to the horn, run to the starter motor, etc. Everything comes out here. So here, all we're doing is activating a switch that causes the M unit to recognize that it's gone to ground. A circuit has gone to ground, like I say, millivolts. And the old style power, full 12-volt power, with all the amperage required for a particular appliance, would have flowed through the switch. In this case, we have very little volts flowing through the switch. So small wires activates a relay, and power comes out on this side. Now the wires running towards the back of the bike are underneath the frame here between the two coils, and then head back. I'll show you some more on the other side of the bike where they actually pass into the frame. And then up here in the front, where the controls are, mostly on the handlebars, we've got switches and headlight controls and whatnot. So that flows, those wires go to the front. Up here on the handlebars, I talked about last time, we have our new switches. This is the old style switch. Operates like this. These switches that I had, this is turn signal. That's left turn signal, right turn signal. Pushing the button in will start the motor. Now the key is not on, so we're not going to be cranking anything. But these switches are available new for a vintage BMW bike. So it's the exact same look. But with the old switches, I had attempted to reuse them, but we found that the contacts weren't good. And rather than mess around with things not being right, I thought, let's just buy new switches and get it done. So we did. New switches here on the right side and new switches on the left side. The switches mount into the perch, what's called the perch for the mirrors. Mirrors would go here. And this section here will have the throttle cable. So the throttle will sit here, you'll roll it, and it will pull the cables going down to the carburetors. It's still open. I'm going to be working on that when this video is completed. We've installed the new risers. We had the old style risers before that came back too close to the tank. This way they're the standard BMW style riser. Handlebars are a little further away. I've got long arms and it will work just fine. This is where the handlebars should be positioned. Here we've got turn signals. These are the turn signals that I said that I thought I had in a box with all my old BMW parts. These are original OEM BMW turn signals, and while they are large and maybe they're not very graceful looking, they are original. And if they're original and we can use them, I think it's good to have that and use the original. So the look on this bike is original as opposed to custom, like the bike that we showed you before, the orange bike. I'm going to step back a little bit and we can take a look at the new tire. This is a Dunlop tire, K70, and it's got a good look to it, I think. It's certainly very functional for the bike. It'll work great, and it conveys kind of a off-road capability. I want to be able to ride this bike on dirt if I get to a dirt road and just not have to turn around. There's the headlight. Inside the headlight bucket is all the wiring that I was talked about a moment ago. The wires come in via the harness down below here. They feed into the headlight bucket, and all the switches connect into the headlight bucket also. So connections to the Moto Gadget M unit are from the switch into the headlight bucket, make the connection, back out this wire, bundle here, and to the M unit to activate the circuits that we need to activate. Coming around this side, well, actually, let's take a look down here first. This is under the front engine cover. The cover is off. I've got it exposed still here. The 3 yellow wires you see, those will go to that regulator rectifier from Rick's that we talked about before. And that's part of the original setup here. Although, like I say, we've installed new wires, and you can see where I cut and soldered wires here to make the length appropriate. We don't want to have a lot of loops of wire lying around. So that's the connection. These 3 plus this brown and this black are the connection for the Rick's regulator. And then down below here, we can see this unit here and this setup here. This is part of the electronic ignition that I've installed. We've converted this from points. Points would have been down here in this area of the bike. That's the camshaft down below. And the the alternator, this is the alternator. It attaches right to the crankshaft of the motorcycle. So there's an aftermarket electronic ignition system that I've installed. It's an optical system. As the motor turns, this disc will turn. You can see there's solid metal here, and there's a gap over here. When the gap gets to the sensor, light will shine through, and it will trigger, that's called a trigger. It will trigger the ignition system to send the command for a spark to the coils. It's a very robust system, and it doesn't require a lot of tuning once it's set up properly. Coming around to this side of the bike, left side now, I've installed the electronics for the module for the electronic ignition. It's a 2-part system. We have to have the trigger down below. We have to have a module. And I explained in a previous video, you couldn't see it because we weren't seeing this side of the bike, but this is where the module attaches. There's a series of wires here that connect to every place they need to go. Some wires go down to the trigger. These small wires go to the trigger. Larger wires come back here to the coils. This is the coil for the left side, or for the left cylinder. We saw the coil for the right cylinder on the other side. And once again, here's another view of the motor. We've got the starter motor here. This is the solenoid, the relay for it. These heavy wires up here from the M unit run down to the tickler, you can call it, which will engage the starter motor with high power coming straight from the battery. And the flywheel is in the back here underneath this. This is where the starter motor teeth will engage onto the flywheel. Everything worked here. We tested this. We had reasonably good compression. I know this part of the system works. We still have not run this engine, but we're getting to that point soon. Back here, this is where the air filter will go. There'll be another cover, like this cover we saw on the other side. There'll be a cover on this side matching, and there'll be a manifold that comes out down to the carburetor. The carburetor will sit right here and attach to let inducted air go into the engine. We've got new spark plugs. These spark plugs are kind of hard to find these days because these are non-resistor style. NGK stopped making non-resistor plugs, but this is a non-resistor BP6 ES plug, and they're a little harder to find than they used to be, unfortunately, but we got some. Then coming back a little further, we've got the oil cap. We've changed all the fluids. We've got a cover here. That's where we can see the flywheel marks for setting the timing, which I've done. I've static timed this motor, setting that electronic ignition, that disc that we saw that allows light to come through or not come through, that sets up the trigger. We set it according to the flywheel position on top dead center. This is the transmission oil fill plug. We've got new transmission oil in there, and we've got our shift lever. I did not change out the neutral switch, and we didn't have to. The neutral switch is right back here in the back of the motor. It is part of the engine monitoring system. Basically, power comes to the light and then back down here. And when we're in neutral, the switch grounds it out and we get a green illumination on the panel. That works. All those light bulbs in the headlight worked. This is the Kickstarter. This style bike has a Kickstarter, also electric start, so we have the option. I'm going to see if I can raise this seat here. Oops, the case is in the way. I've installed the case for the purpose of making the video, and now the seat won't go up. Well, that's interesting to know. There's a new battery inside there. I've got a fuse, main fuse. You can see the 2 red leads in the main fuse, and all the wiring connects back up to the M unit, like I explained before. Taking a look down here, we've got new rubbers on the foot pegs. The foot peg rubber was pretty well worn, so that's new and good to go also, but it's the old style. There are a couple different styles. This is the old style, and I like the old style. Coming back a little further, we can see the rack. This is the luggage rack. It attaches up here behind the shock absorber and down here at the passenger foot peg. So the rack fit. This happens to be a short wheelbase motorcycle. If you're familiar with BMWs, you know that the swing arm comes in 2 different lengths, short for short wheelbase and a long wheelbase. Now this is a short wheelbase bike, but the luggage rack is able to fit on either one. So we installed the stock luggage rack. I didn't paint it or anything. Again, I like this patina. It just shows that it's not a brand new bike. And it's not a brand new bike. It's 50 years old. So we can model and show what a well-maintained vintage bike can still look like. So we've got another case that will fit on this side, just like the case we saw on the other side. And that'll be all the luggage capacity we need. The seat, I'm going to go closer up view of the seat than you've had in the past. It's in excellent condition. It's a ribbed seat set up for 2 riders. You can kind of see where it cups here in the back and it's lower here in the front for the driver. Got nice white piping on it. Piping's a little grayed, but that's part of being vintage. And it's got this great grab bar here. I polished this up a little bit, so this is nice and shiny. And it looks like it's been cared for. And it has been. And here's our R75/5 BMW logo. Back here now, we've got the brake light assembly that came with the bike. It was on here. There were different turn signals. So these turn signals, again, came from my old box of BMW parts. And they fit and they work and they look good. So I've polished them up again, like the front, just a little bit. They're not super clean, but the chrome looks better than it did when it just came out of the box. Also in the box of parts that I had, I found this reflector. Whoever had the bike before drilled some more holes here in this fiberglass fender. And rather than just let those holes there, if I had the reflector, I thought I may as well use it, so I put that on. Back here we've got the rear tire, the same Dunlop K70. It's a larger tire than the front, of course, and again, it's going to enable the bike to go onto some dirt roads. While we're back here, I want to just talk a little bit about what I found when I took this wheel off. I mentioned in the last show that we weren't going to take it apart any further than we had to, and if I discovered anything, I would let you know. So I did discover something inside this hub. This is the wheel hub right here. Here's the axle. I removed the axle, pulled the wheel out, and I discovered something inside. On the inside of this hub, and on the other side over here we've got the final drive unit. A little hard to see, but there's a final drive unit right here, and the drive shaft is inside this tube. It spins this direction, and it comes back here, and that rotational motion this way has to be converted to rotational motion this way to drive the wheel. And there are a set of gears in there. And then that wheel has to be able to be taken off and put back on, but still connect to that drive. And it connects via splines. There are some splines on the inside of the final drive here. and there's splines on the inside of the hub, and they slide together and they engage each other. The splines can get worn, and in fact, it looks like the splines on this bike had been worn at one time. Now, they weren't worn when I took it off, but they must have been worn at one time because there was some evidence of, it looked like damage on the inside of the hub from splines, maybe breaking or something happening. And the spline cup on the inside of the hub here on the wheel was actually brand new. I mean, look, pristine. But it was attached in a way that was a little questionable. This bike is a R75/5. The /5 speaks to the model of the bike. It's a 750, that's the R75, and it's a /5. There are later versions of these motorcycles, and they're /6 or /7. The rear wheels are all interchangeable between the /5, /6, and /7 because the splines all line up. But the spline attachment on the /5 is different than the spline attachment on the 6 and 7. On the 6 and 7, they used 6mm rivets to rivet the spline into the wheel hub. On the /5, they used 5mm rivets. And I think they probably found that the 5mm was not robust enough, so they went to the 6mm rivets, 10 of them, for the /6 and /7 models. Now, it's hard to replace the rivets. It requires a 20-ton press. I've got a 20-ton press, but it's a kind of a tricky job. And there is a workaround where you can use bolts, like 6mm bolts. Replace the 6mm rivet, use a 6mm bolt, and you can bolt this new spline cup into the hub if you have a /6 or /7 model. On a /5 model, there is no ready-made bolt fix for replacing the spline cup. Now, somebody had replaced the spline cup and used 1/4" 20 bolts. So they widened the holes from 5mm up to about 6mm, which is a 1/4", approximately 1/4". And they bolted the spline cup into the hub, trying to use the fix that's recommended for the /6 and /7 on a /5 bike, but it didn't really work very well, and the spline cup was actually installed a little bit crooked. So you could look at it and you can see that the cup was not sitting in the wheel properly. So I wasn't sure what to do about it. I thought maybe I would have to replace the wheel. I ended up removing the spline cup by taking out those bolts, and then I made my own bolt fix. The holes weren't quite all the way to a 1/4". They were a little bit less, and I was able to fit a 5mm bolt through the hole. I had to grind down the head of a socket cap button style bolt so that it wouldn't protrude very far. Grind down the head to make it fit into the lip of the spline cup, and then put the bolt through the hub. And then I used coupler nuts, which are very tall. They're about 7/8 of an inch long. And they can screw down onto the nut, and you can still get a wrench on it. So I worked around the problem that's caused by the /5 hub and was able to get a bolt style fix in there to hold that cup in. The cup is now in nice and straight. It's a good way to do it. If you happen to be working on a /5 bike and you got an issue with that spline cup, let me know, and I'd be glad to give you some more details and some photos of what I've done. But I was able to bolt it in there. Now the bolts there's 10 of them. They're 5mm hardened steel bolts, and they're held in shear. So they're torqued to where they need to be, but they're held in shear, and I don't expect those 10 bolts are going to break in order for it to loosen up. The rivets did have a problem apparently, because there is some damage on the inside of the hub here. It looks like the spline cup may have let go at one point. But this one is new, it's in great shape, the splines are great, and now it's bolted in a way that I think is going to work. I don't ride aggressively anyway. If you're really doing, putting a lot of torque through the rear wheel, maximum acceleration or whatnot, you're going to put a lot of stress on those bolts, but I don't ride that way. I ride conservatively, and I kind of ride gently. So I think that it'll work fine. So that's all inside the hub. And maybe at some point in the future, if I need to take it apart again, I'll do a video showing what I've done in there. But the hub was a surprise, the spline cup, and I was able to get it squared away. So we're in good shape there. We'll continue around. We talked about the tire. We talked about our case. Looking good. And actually, we're right back to the beginning here. Not much more to do. I've got speedometer drive cable here. I've got clutch cable here. I'm going to get all these cables attached. Get the carburetors back on. Get the throttle cables connected. And then we'll be ready to test this bike pretty soon. The brake shoes on the front and the brake shoes on the rear all looked good. I think we're in fine shape there. I've got new fluid inside the swing arm and new fluid inside the final drive unit. So all the oil's been replaced. Everything looks like it's good to go. I think this bike is going to be a good running bike for us. So that is it for this episode number 3. I want to thank you for tuning in. I'm David Schoneman. You're watching Schoneman's Garage, and we're rebuilding this 1972 BMW. Hope you like it. Tune in next time. Next time, we'll be hopefully running the engine, or at least getting it running before we have the next episode. And then I'm going to try to put this camera on the bike, too, when the spring finally gets here, and take a ride around and show you how it's working. But we're in end of February here, and it's warm weather's coming. So we're looking forward to getting this thing on the road. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.